Hi, welcome to Right Now. This is a podcast where we talk about the business and craft of writing science fiction and fantasy. I am here with science fiction writer Jeffrey H. Haskell. He is the author of the Full Metal Superhero series. I am Rebekah Haskell. I am a cover designer and illustrator by trade. I also write fantasy, and my first novel, A Sword for Chaos, will be coming out in 2018. So today we wanted to talk a little bit about our writing advice we disagree with. This is a fun topic because as I have been writing for about 10 years now, and my first novel is just coming out. So uh, not as prolific as my husband, but I've been part of a few writer communities, and Jeff has as well. And there is a lot of writing advice out there, a lot of rules. And I'm putting those in quotation marks because the first thing I wanted to say is that honestly, when it comes to writing or any creative pursuit, there really are no rules. There are guidelines, and your mileage will vary depending on what kind of writer you are, what genre you're writing in, what your target market is, and honestly, depending on circumstance. So just take into mind, regardless of what writing advice you receive anywhere else or here on this podcast, your mileage may vary. I feel like the reason that writing is taught in absolutes when writers are first starting out is because, well, as writers, I think to be a writer, you need to have kind of a sort of unique blend of hubris and self-consciousness, because we all feel like we can create something with our brains that the whole world is going to want to hear. And as a result, most writers think they're that special snowflake that doesn't have to listen to the rules. And I kind of feel like that's why beginning writers are encouraged, don't do this, don't do that. But as we've explored our own writing processes, we have come across some rules that we don't think are as awesome. Jeff, did you want to start out?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that great introduction, by the way, Beck. So one of my biggest beefs I hear all the time from writers, and usually they're not like authors who are best-selling authors or authors who've made a lot of money. They're people who are giving writing advice on YouTube or on Facebook, and they say you don't have to write every day. Well, technically that's true, because a lot of people like, I don't write on Sundays, so you don't necessarily have to write every day. But I feel like the key to success in this business is perseverance and persistence. And if you aren't writing every day, if you aren't working on your craft every day, if you aren't working on your storytelling ability every day, then you're doing yourself a huge disservice. If you want to be a full-time writer, and you may not want to be, so bear that in mind, but if you want to be a full-time author, you need to be a full-time writer. And if you want to be a full-time writer, you've got to write every day. And there are always things that happen, the holidays and whatnot, but if you really want to be successful, you need to write. And listening to advice that tells you not to do the thing that you want to be good at, I think my analogy, the best analogy I've ever heard is Michael Jordan didn't get good at playing basketball by not playing basketball.
Awesome. No, I've also heard writing advice that's similar, and I think as a writer, the degree to which you incorporate writing into your life is going to differ depending on who you are and what your goals are. But in general, I think the important part is you have to be consistent. And just watching Jeff go through his novel writing process over the last few years, I think that when it is a daily thing, it doesn't think it always has to be a daily thing. I know authors who write once a week, or they write on the weekends, or they can't get into the right frame of mind, when their head is full of work stuff. So there always are exceptions, but I do think like making it a daily habit, trying to get in something every day, it gives you more opportunities to succeed, because you're always going to have that day when you sit down to write and it's crap, or you're feeling sick and you just can't tap into that creative energy or whatever, and you're not going to produce something. If you blow a weekend doing that and you don't have an opportunity to write until the next weekend, you lose a lot of time. If it's a daily habit, then if you have a day where maybe you only get out a few words or nothing that you write, you don't feel like it's the quality that needs to make it into the novel, you have tomorrow to try again. So I agree with that.
Absolutely. And one of the things that really got me going was that I really wanted to sell some books, and I really wanted to be able to make some money doing this. I love storytelling. And that was just to buckle down and make myself get up early every morning and write. Now, writing for me is an early morning thing. I'm best at it when I don't have the weight of the day crushing me to small little pieces. But the other people write at night. I know, Rebekah, you used to have a lot of success writing at like 3 o'clock in the morning. I know a lot of writers whose writing day starts at 10 p.m. You just got to find that time that works for you, and you just need to write when you can, as often as you can. Because storytelling and writing is not like everything else. I won't say it's a perishable skill, because it really isn't, but it is a skill that requires active and steady use of it. And, you know, maybe that's writing, or maybe that's reading a book on craft, or maybe that's discussing craft, but it is something every day. Every day, something.
Yeah, you've got to keep your head in the game. I wanted to add something really quick, as I hear from a lot of authors turn the internet off. And I know that this is a good one for a lot of people. This is a good one for a lot of people because Facebook. And, you know, I get on Facebook and then all of a sudden 3 hours is gone, and I've done nothing. But I don't find it as much of a challenge while I'm writing. And for me, the internet is a huge, huge necessary part of my process, because thesaurus.com and Wikipedia, there are certain places that I want to go for reference. And not because a lot of people are like, don't write with a thesaurus in your hand. That's another one. Is, well, yeah, if you are looking for another word that's just bigger or fancier so that you sound more intelligent, that's probably not the best way to use a thesaurus. The way I use the thesaurus is that I know there's a word that is perfect for this. I know that word. I've used that word. I just can't remember it. And that's how I use it. And so I always have that in the other window while I'm writing. Honestly, it just depends on you. You know yourself. Are you going to be able to focus on writing, or are you going to get sidetracked on Instagram or, you know, YouTube, for instance? Are you going to, you know, watch?
But you should watch our podcast.
Or are you going to watch podcasts about writing instead of actually writing? You know, that's something you have to consider as writing. Okay, so the one I wanted to introduce is that you improve your writing by writing. Okay, now again, this is a little bit. That is true to an extent. However, I have an alarming number of friends who have been writing for at least as long as I have, for years and years, have been writing, and haven't gotten any closer to being publishable. That approach of, in order to get better, I just need to do more of it. Of course, you need to write. Of course, you need to write. That is an absolutely vital part of becoming a better writer and producing something that you're proud of. However, I think you also need to approach it point of view. We all have, usually most of us come to writing because we have some sort of talent in writing, and talent will only take you so far. And basically the best analogy that I have for this is my artwork. I'm talented at artwork. I've always been good at it since I was a child, and, you know, in school, the art class was always the easy A for me. But I think I got to be about, I want to say 18 or 19, and I stopped improving. I just stopped improving. And I realized that the reason why that happened is because I just kept doing the things that I was good at over and over again. I did the things that I felt good about, and I was just skating on talent. And talent had taken me as far as it could, and now I needed to study. Now I needed to educate myself about those things that didn't come as naturally to me. And I think that the same thing applies to your writing. Yes, you need to write, but you don't, just writing isn't the only thing you need to do. You need to be able to write critically. You need to be able to read critically. You need to be able to look at your work and other people's work and say, okay, why did this work? Why did it not work? And be able to break those things down and understand the craft of writing in order to be able to put together a solid story.
And that's important, because a lot of writers call it deliberate practice. You know, you're not just writing what suits your fancy. You're trying to write something very specific. And if you can't write that, then you need to figure out why you can't write it and how to improve yourself to make it better. I have wanted for years to write military science fiction, a very specific subset of military science fiction about a crew of a ship and a Navy captain. And just this year, I feel like I was finally good enough to start doing that, like just in the last few months. So a lot of my writing up to that point was working toward characterization, working toward emotion, working toward study of plot, and, you know, getting to the point where I could write something that I wanted to write in a way that I knew people would like. I took all of this year, 2017, I took all of January and February off to read craft books because I was missing the boat by just a little bit on emotion in my characters. They were very superficial emotionally, and I needed to really invest people in, and I didn't know how to do that. And so I read a couple of books about it, and my next stories, showed that work. So deliberate practice. You really, every bit of writing is great. Do it as much as you can, but you need to be deliberate in how you increase your skills.
Mm-hmm. And I've had the unique experience of being able to watch you on your writing journey from the very, very beginning. And I have been very impressed by I kind of feel like you've learned in 2 years what it took me 5 years to learn. You know what I'm saying? And I feel like that part of that is that deliberate, I need to figure out how to do this one thing. I'm not good enough at this. Let me go find out how other people who I admire make it work. How do I make this into a strength? Something that's a weakness, how do I make it into a strength? And going in there and studying it and deciding, okay, how do I show character interior? How do I make or develop my characters into people that seem like people that my readers will really get on board with? And I've watched you do that as well. I think I was writing this novel that's going to be released in 2018. I think I was about 70,000 words in, and I realized I just wasn't a good enough writer. I wasn't a good enough writer to make the story the way I wanted it to be. And so I dumped it. I dumped all 70,000 words, and I spent the next few years reading everything I could get my hands on, listening to people, reading a lot of advice on writing, on craft from people who I admired, and I knew that they knew what they were talking about. And some of that advice, of course, one of the reasons why we're doing this podcast is because not all of the advice worked for me, and some of the advice was contradictory, and you kind of have to use your instincts as a writer and your self-knowledge and a little bit of trial and error to figure out what works for you. But if you want to, talent will only take you so far. And I do believe that you will continue to improve as long as you continue to write. However, I think that you can improve if you will actually make it into an active subject study.
Yeah, absolutely. You definitely want to always be improving, which, writing every day and deliberate practice kind of brings us to our next subject, which is one of my favorites, which you hear this advice all the time: avoid outside influences while you're writing. You need to be original. I forget which book in the Bible it's in, but it says there's nothing new under the sun, and it was written in 600 BC.
No.
It was true then.
Wasn't that Shakespeare?
No, Shakespeare copied it from the Bible. So it was true for Shakespeare.
Okay.
It was true. Leviticus. It's in Leviticus. It was true for Shakespeare. It was true for the Bible. It was true when whoever wrote Gilgamesh wrote Gilgamesh. There is no original story you can tell. There is no original original plot. There's no original characters. All you have that is you is your voice. And I can't tell you what your voice is. Nobody can tell you what your voice is. That's your uniqueness. That is what you bring to the table. Everything else, I promise you can find somebody who did it and probably did it better. The danger of this advice, the be original, avoid outside influences, is what I call the Skyfall danger. Now, if you like Skyfall, I'm not knocking it in any way. Well, okay, I'm knocking it a little bit, but Skyfall was an action movie filmed by somebody who had never seen an action movie before. And writing is like that. If you write a book and you think you have written this great original work and you have studiously avoided reading anything in that genre or any other genre that might influence your mind in some way, then you're most likely just going to write a book that is someone has read before many times. If you read wildly, read in your genre, read in other genres, and you can tie that in with deliberate practice, because one of the best ways to learn how to do relationships in a book is to read romance novels, is you will have that great story that nobody will care if it's originally unique, because the thing that they will be reading it for is you, your voice, what you bring to the table. I
think the only thing that I would have to add to that is because I know that scares everybody, that idea that they can't create something original. I do think that you can create something that's fresh and compelling. It may not be a thought that nobody in the history of forever has ever heard, but it may be something that your particular readers have never come across before. I think your chances at being unique, I want to separate original from unique, because I feel like original is used for nobody has ever thought of this. You're doing this for the first time. Nobody's ever had this thought. But unique is what happens when you take we're all influenced by everything. We're all influenced by something. We've been influenced since the moment we were born, since cartoons we watched when we were children, the stories our parents told us before we could read. We started having those influences. I think where we can get bogged down is when those influences are very small and few. When you've only ever read fantasy novels, or you've only ever read, you've only ever played D&D, and that's where your grasp of fantasy comes from. Or when you have when you have a small pool to draw from, I feel like your work is going to be smaller. I feel like you become more fresh and more unique the more influences that you have to draw from. For instance, if you were going back to art, because that's my wheelhouse, is if you only have a few colors to paint with. Let's say you have green and you have brown. Okay, you have green, turquoise, and brown, and those are the colors you have to work with. You're going to paint something that looks very much like what somebody else would paint. It's going to look very reminiscent of another painting that's just painted with those colors. But if you have a full spectrum to draw from, you can create something rich and deep that your choices will be more important, because the colors that you choose as an artist are going to reflect who you are. And when you have a wide palette to work from, and you have a lot of sources of inspiration to draw from, your originality as a person is going to come through more in the work that you do, because your voice as a writer is going to show through in those choices that you make, and what you find compelling, what interests you about this theme or that setting. You're going to have a lot more to draw from. So I see this especially in fantasy authors. So if you have an idea for a magic system, and Brandon Sanderson has already done it, because he's pretty much done everything. Okay, I want to let you know, Brandon Sanderson was not the first person to create a magic system that was based on imbuing magic in metal or gems. That has been around for a long time. I think the first one that comes to mind is Anne Bishop's Black Jewels trilogy, and her magic system was completely based on imbuing rocks or gems and metal with magical properties. He is not the one that started out with the idea of was it the Rhythmatist, where the magic system was based on drawing, on painting. He didn't do that first. I'm pretty sure that Harold the Purple Crayon got there first. And also Roger Zelazny in the Nine Princes of Amber, there was a lot of magic that was based on painting and that sort of thing. If you're trying to find that one idea that nobody has ever thought of, you're going to be looking for a long time. But that's not the point. That's not the point of art. It's not the point of writing. It is finding combination of all of the ideas that you have ever had or been exposed to, and putting yourself in there and making something new like that, making something new through that method.
And speaking of making something new, and that's all really great advice, I think, too, about combining stuff to be unique in your own voice. But speaking of something new, is I want to touch on a lot, depending on what your goal as a writer. There's two different goals, or many different goals, but two different goals that come to mind for writing. One is you want to be an author because you love writing and you want to make money, and one is you want to be an author because you have a story that you want to tell, and it's a really important story. So what I'm addressing the authors who want to make money, who, yes, they love writing and they love storytelling, but their goal is to become full-time writers and authors, and they want to sell their books and they want to make money. And this could be for self-publish, or this could be for publishing. It really, this is either way, but I hear this all the time. You don't release your book until it's perfect. And you know, I'm gonna tell you right now, there's no such thing as a perfect book. There never will be a perfect book. You will spend hours spell checking your book and going over your manuscript, and you will hit that publish button, and on page 1 there'll be an error. Or you will submit it to be published.
Speaking from experience here.
Yes, speaking from experience. You will submit it to be published, and your publisher will get it, and they will have their Kirkland editor, professional editor, go over it, and there will be a misspelled word in the first chapter. And that is just human nature. It is just life. Your book is never going to be perfect. So if you wait until your book is perfect before you pull the trigger on publishing, you're never going to publish. You're going to be waiting for a train that just isn't ever going to come. So I'm not saying you just go, okay, well, good enough, because there are authors who do that, and if it works for you, fantastic. I am saying there's this rule called the 80-20 rule. 80% of your results from 20% of your work. And so if you spend, 5 or 6 hours hunting down the last 2 typos that you think are in the book, even though there's going to be more, is that time well spent? Is that worth your time? So obviously, of course, you want to get your book edited, and you want to get your book spell checked, and you want to get your book line edited and proofread and stuff like that. I'm just saying is don't wait for your book to be perfect. And I'm talking about spelling errors here, but there's other things. Sometimes when in my books, I don't quite nail a scene the way I want to, but it doesn't really have a huge impact overall on the story for it not being like this much better. And you just gotta roll with it and say, you know what, I will remember what I did wrong here or how I can do it better, and I will apply that to my next book. Because really, that's how you improve, is you recognize the mistakes you made and you move forward. But if you're always looking for the mistakes and never moving forward, then that's exactly what will happen, is you'll never move forward. So, the myth of the perfect book. People will tell you, make your book perfect before you release it, because you only get one launch. But, there comes a point where you need to move forward. So don't think that your book has to be perfect, because it doesn't.
I just want to add to that, because I want to add to that I think it's useful to look at your book that you're writing now as your snapshot of you as a writer right now, because ideally the goal is that you're always going to be improving. You're going to be improving until the day you die. Hopefully, if you continue writing, you're going to continue improving. So from that respect, a year after you finish your book, you're always going to have something that you've learned, something that you're better at now. You could chase that perfect book into your 90s, because you're always going to be improving as a writer. So I think it's important to look at the book as a snapshot of who you are as a writer now. And as you continue on your journey, each book that you write will be a snapshot of you as a writer throughout that journey of learning and improving your craft. I will admit that I'm not the best example of this necessarily, because after I dumped that 70,000 words and spent the next few years trying to learn how to become a better writer, it was 9 years. It was 9 years into the project when I finally finished the book and read it and said, yes, this is the story I wanted to tell. This is what I was trying to get to. Again, I was improving my craft, but I've only produced one novel. One novel in 9 years. And again, I think that goes back to, what are your goals? If your goals are to be a working writer who can support themselves off of their work, that's probably not the way to go. But again, it depends on your goals, and not all of us want the same thing. For me, for instance, I love my day job. I love my day job. I'm a designer and an illustrator, and I love it. I don't necessarily need living off of the writing that I'm doing. But this story that I've written is really important to me. This is a special story for me, and I wanted to tell it right. And so I think you need to look at that. You need to look at what are your goals as a writer? Do you want to be a working writer? Is this something that you're going to be doing alongside your day job? Is that sufficient for you? Will that satisfy you? I also think that part of the reason that people struggle with this is because we've all been brought up on the traditional publishing model, which honestly doesn't exist anymore for indie publishing. I believe that it doesn't exist for indie publishing, and it doesn't exist for traditional publishing, is where you could write a book a year for living off of that. I don't believe that world exists. I don't think it has existed for a long time.
There are people who do it. It's just something you can count on.
Right. It's nothing that you can, it's not something that you can count on. So they're either outliers or they're people that have huge backlists to begin with. Okay. They're people who already have just, 20 books out, and they only need one book a year to bring in a new crop of readers who are going to read that book, and then they're going to read the entire backlist, and that's something that can continue to support them. But if you're starting out new, especially if you intend to go into self-publishing, the book a year it's certainly not going to work out. I won't say there's a non-zero chance. That's a non-zero chance that it will work out for you. But again, I kind of feel like when it comes to, especially when you're publishing your own work, there is an element of luck, but I feel like the more you stack the deck in your favor, the less luck plays a part in it. I did want to say one of the rules that I was going to object to, and I don't know how much weight this has, is the don't edit as you write. Now, again, I'm going to go back to the whole your mileage may vary, and it depends on what your goals are as a writer. If you are trying to reach a level of production, you're trying to be prolific as a writer and get as much as you can out there as possible, this is probably not the way for you to go. But it's something that, for me as a writer, and taking my own goals into account, has been important for me. Me personally, I feel motivated as a creator when I look back on what I've done and I feel good about it. And I feel like, that's what I wanted to say. That I have tried to write the dirty draft. I have tried really hard to just like pound it out, get it down, and then I can go back and rewrites. And for me as an artist, okay, that is just, it's crushing for me. It's crushing. To go back and look over the previous day's work and just be like, oh my gosh, this is such crap. It is hugely discouraging to me. And I have a really hard time pushing forward. And I know some other writers who are that way as well, who if they can't get it maybe not perfect. It may be at the point where you'll still go back to it and work on it some more, but at least to the point where that's close. That is almost exactly how I want it to be. That's almost aiming for. That can be encouraging. So again, look at who you are as a writer. Look at what encourages you. A really good friend who was learning to write as I was several years ago, and she was having trouble getting through her manuscript, and I just hated the advice that I had been given by everybody. I was like, just get it out. Just get it out. And this was early enough in my career not in my career. This is early enough in my writing journey that I also felt like these rules applied to me as well. And I was like, just get it out. Just write the manuscript, because it was what I was trying to do as well. Just get it out. And when you're finished it, you can go back to it and make it into what you wanted. And I watched her completely stall out. She got through, I think she went through a nano. She did National Novel Writing Month 1 year, and like 60, 70,000 words in that month. I think she actually went over the limit that you need in order to win nano, but she never touched it again, because every time she went back and looked at it, she's just that, and I understand that feeling too, because I am very much like that, looking back at it and being like, I just don't even want, it just saps all my motivation. But again, if you want to make it as a working writer, and you want this to be your career, and you want something that's going to support you, you have to, again, like Jess said, look at that 80-20 rule. At what point are you getting, there's the rule of diminishing returns. At what point is the work you're putting into perfecting it getting you less improvement percentage-wise than it is worth? And so yeah, if you're looking at making this your career, you're probably going to want to err to that side of the advice. And with all advice, I feel like we kind of treat writers as if they're binary. You either are an outliner or you're a pantser. Honestly, that's usually not how it is. This is discovery writing versus outlining is usually a spectrum, and you will fall somewhere on that spectrum, and it might not be all the way over here. You might not be all the way over here. For me, the thing that worked the best was discovery writing the first 3 chapters and then outlining the rest. And so you'll have your own mix. And if you edit a little bit as you go, maybe not as much as I do, if you edit a little bit as you go, that may work for you. But again, that goes back to the thing is, the point of who are you as a writer? What are your goals? Sometimes it just takes a little bit of trial and error to figure out what those things are.
Absolutely. I always say the hardest part about being a writer at first is figuring out how you write a book, because you don't know. Nobody else can tell you either. You just have to do it. So there's one last piece of them.
Just let me add, everybody is gonna like line up to tell you how to write a book, but you are the only person. You are the only person that knows how you write a book, and that's something that you have to find out. You have to figure that out. I think every writer has to figure that out for themselves.
So the last piece of advice we want to touch on is, generally speaking, writing advice you get in school. The thing to remember about the publishing industry is that a lot of writers, especially teachers and stuff, came up in a time when publishing was the only game in town. So when someone gives you advice on writing, you've got to square that off against, is this for traditional publishing, or is this for self-publishing, or is this for both? So a lot of writing advice you get in schools is about short stories. So Becky's compiled a little list of things that they tell you in school to do, not to do, and we're going to say why that you can do them. Go ahead.
I think one of the reasons, and again, if you've been through a college creative writing class, you will probably get the same list. Avoid adverbs. Don't use the word said too much. Avoid passive voice. Construct your sentences in the most compact, succinct ways possible. Use smaller words. Use, what did they say? $1 words instead of $10 words. I feel like one of the reasons why these are taught as absolutes in creative writing courses is because this is absolute beginner level. It's absolute beginner level. And it's one thing to teach a writer not to say after every single sentence, which can get incredibly annoying, for instance. But it's another thing to teach them judgment of when to know when to do it. When do you do it? When don't you do it? That's a whole nother ballgame. And honestly, it takes a lot longer than the 3 months that you have in that semester to learn from your instructor. So I feel like coming from a beginning point, you need to look at your use of adverbs, look at your use of passive voice, and make sure that that's the best way to do it. I personally love passive voice. I love passive voice. I feel like passive voice has created some of the most beautiful language I've ever seen in books. And I read some of my favorite writers, and they use it, not all the time, but they do use it. The struggle with passive voice is a lot of times when you use passive voice, meaning can get lost, and it can be difficult to, you'll lose clarity. And in those cases, of course, you want to err on the side of clarity, because you want the reader to be able to understand what you're saying, first and foremost. And style comes after comprehension. But that doesn't mean never use passive voice. And I will, in the writing communities that I've been a part of, I would see intermediate and advanced writers. I mean, people who they have learned the basics and then some, and they've got their craft. Their craft is good, and they'll have their work up for critique. And we're talking about writers who are proficient in writing, not necessarily writers whose careers have taken off. Because I kind of feel like once your career takes off, you're past the point where you need to listen to anybody. I mean, you'll always have your group of trusted readers. You'll have your beta readers or whatever, but you're not on an internet forum asking for people to tell you whether or not your writing is good. But I would see these writers who are good writers, and they would put their work up, and they would have 10 people in a line saying, well, you are using adverbs. You can't use adverbs. You can't use adverbs. You can't do it. You know, I mean, that's against the rules. And they're coming off of their college classes that all taught them never do this, to never do it. You need to write like Ernest Hemingway. Well, let's tell you the truth, I wasn't really a fan of Hemingway. I kind of like Faulkner better, you know. I was kind of a Dickens fan, you know. So that's the way that I'm going to write, is I'm going to write in the way that feels good to me. I think it's important to know why these rules are out there, know why they're there. Passive voice is because, for passive voice, it's because clarity can be lost. Where you get a little bit too poetic and then nobody knows what you're talking about. Adverbs, because of adverbs, people can use adverbs as crutches to not use the right verb. Sometimes there's a better verb for you to use, and just slap in an adverb alongside a I want to say a mundane and vague verb, that's not the better choice. So the encouragement to not use adverbs is to try to encourage you, use your words better. Pick the right word instead of trying to supplement a word that's not right on its own. Using said, okay, maybe don't use said for every sentence. In writing, you'll find that repetition can get really annoying. I mean, it can get annoying fast. So mix it up a little bit. Use said sometimes, maybe just use an action to tag that part of dialogue. I mean, we could spend forever getting into that, but understand the rules. When people come at you with the rules, don't do this, do this. Ask yourself why you do not do that. And once you can find out the why behind that, that's when you start to develop that judgment of when you can do it, when it's okay for you to do it, when you are not abusing those adverbs and in order to, because you can't find the right verb. You know what I'm saying? So understand why those rules are there. They're not always wrong. They're not always wrong. But again, I go back to that there are no rules. There are no rules. We're all pirates here. They're just sort of like guidelines. And you as a writer, what you're writing, what your genre you're writing in, what kind of a market you're going for. I mean, if probably a market, or I don't want to say market because it's not always about market. There's an audience for almost everything. And you need to study that and understand what are you going for. Imagine we'll be writing your book and we'll be reading your book, and you can take from that you can make a judgment of where your writing needs to go. So pay attention to you as a writer. As long as you know why those rules are put there in the first place, then you can again start to be able to use your judgment to know when it's okay to use those things. How about you, Jeff?
No, I mean, all those are really excellent points. I'm a huge fan of Captain Barbosa. They're not like actual rules, more like guidelines, you know. And I try to remember that the only rule about writing is to write. Everything else is a guideline. And I have noticed over the years as I write that there are rules that I used to follow, and I was like, I didn't know why I was following them. I just was. And then I realized, oh, I didn't need to, because I just read this other big best-selling author, and he used the word quickly. She walked across the room quickly. I was always told never to do that. And so, you know, it all depends on your style, your taste, your voice. Just remember that when someone tries to tell you that there's a rule for writing, just use your head and use your own perspective and figure out if that's a rule that applies to you or not, a guideline that applies to you or not. We're actually losing our internet a little bit here, so I think we're going to wrap it up. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We'll try and do these podcasts every week, so join us on Right Now next week.